Ashenmeres People. Sent to the royal court as a bargaining piece, Lady Isabel of Westvale knew she was surrounded by enemies. But when Sir Gareth Fitzrohan, the king's most trusted enforcer, approached her, she saw something unexpected in his gaze. He leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "They sent you here to be a pawn," he murmured. "But tell me, my lady, are you willing to be something more?" Chapter 1. The Bargaining Piece. The carriage wheels crunched on the uneven cobblestones, each jolt a stark reminder of Lady Isabel of Westvale's unwilling journey. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight that pierced the heavy velvet curtains, illuminating the cramped interior. She smoothed a hand over the rich, wine-colored fabric of her gown, a futile attempt to impose order on a world that had been irrevocably tilted on its axis. Westvale, her home, with its rolling hills and familiar, comforting sense of wood smoke and wildflowers, felt a lifetime away. Now, she was a bargaining piece, a token in the endless game of power that played out between her father, Lord Elmsworth, and King Audric. The carriage lurched to a halt, the sudden stillness more jarring than the constant motion. Isabel drew a steadying breath, her fingers tightening around the small, worn leather-bound book of prayers she held in her lap. It was a gift from her mother, a tangible link to a woman she barely remembered, a woman who had also been a pawn in a political marriage. The thought sent a shiver of apprehension down her spine. The carriage door swung open, revealing a stern-faced guard, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "My lady," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth, "we have arrived at the royal court of Eldoria." Isabel stepped out, her gaze immediately drawn to the imposing edifice before her. Eldoria Castle was a fortress of gray stone, its towers scraping the sky like the claws of some ancient beast. Flags bearing the royal crest, a golden lion rampant on a field of azure, snapped in the brisk wind, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the somber stone. The air was thick with the sounds of a bustling court, the clang of blacksmiths' hammers, the shouts of vendors in the nearby marketplace, the distant strains of a lute being played in one of the castle's many courtyards. She was led through a maze of corridors, each more opulent than the last. Tapestries depicting scenes of heroic battles and mythical creatures adorned the walls, their vibrant threads a testament to the wealth and power of the kingdom. The air was heavy with the scent of incense and beeswax, a cloying sweetness that did little to mask the underlying tension that permeated the very stones of the castle. Servants, their faces carefully neutral, scurried past, their eyes averted. Isabel felt their scrutiny, the unspoken questions, the judgment. She was an outsider, a stranger in a strange land, her every move watched, her every word weighed. Finally, they reached a large, ornately carved wooden door. The guard knocked twice, a sharp, resonant sound that echoed down the corridor. A voice from within, deep and authoritative, commanded them to enter. The room was a vast chamber, dominated by a long, polished table surrounded by high-backed chairs. Sunlight streamed through tall, arched windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. At the head of the table sat King Audric, a man whose presence filled the room even before he spoke. He was older than Isabel had expected, his hair streaked with silver, his face etched with the lines of responsibility and, perhaps, regret. But his eyes, a piercing blue, held a keen intelligence and an unwavering resolve. Around the table sat a collection of nobles, their faces a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and thinly veiled contempt. Isabel recognized a few from the whispered conversations she'd overheard during her journey. Lord Beaumont, a man known for his ruthless ambition, Lady Annalise, the king's sharp-tongued sister, and Sir Callan, the captain of the royal guard, his hand never far from his sword. King Audric gestured towards a chair at the far end of the table. "Lady Isabel of Westvale," he said, his voice carrying a weight that belied his calm demeanor. "Welcome to Eldoria. We trust your journey was uneventful." Isabel inclined her head, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "As uneventful as a journey can be when one is being traded like a prize mare, Your Majesty." A ripple of murmurs went around the table. King Audric's lips tightened, but he merely nodded. Indeed. Your father, Lord Elmsworth, has pledged his loyalty and his troops to our cause. In return, we have offered you sanctuary and a place at our court. Sanctuary. The word felt hollow, a gilded cage. Isabel knew the true meaning of this exchange. She was a hostage, a guarantee of her father's good behavior. Her life, her future, were no longer her own. I understand my role, Your Majesty, she replied, her gaze meeting his directly. She would not cower. She would not show fear. She would survive this somehow. The king studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he gave a slight nod. We shall see if that understanding extends to the nuances of courtly life, Lady Isabel. You will be under the protection of Sir Gareth Fitzrohan. He will see to your needs and ensure your acclamation. A tall figure detached himself from the shadows near the window. Sir Gareth Fitzrohan. Isabel had heard whispers of him, too. The king's enforcer, they called him. A man of unwavering loyalty, of ruthless efficiency, of unsettling silence. He stepped forward, his movements fluid and graceful, like a predator stalking its prey. He was younger than she'd anticipated, perhaps in his early 30s, with dark hair that fell to his shoulders and eyes that were the color of storm clouds. A scar bisected his left eyebrow, a silent testament to a past filled with battles and bloodshed. He bowed low before her, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. My lady, he said, his voice a low rumble. I am at your service. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of something that she couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't hostility, nor was it the cold indifference she had expected. It was guarded, watchful, perhaps even sympathetic. He straightened, turning to face the king. Your Majesty, with your permission, I will escort Lady Isabel to her chambers. King Audric gave a curt nod. See that she is well cared for, Sir Gareth. She is a valuable asset. The words, though spoken without malice, sent a fresh wave of despair washing over Isabel. An asset. A thing. Not a woman with hopes and dreams and fears. As Sir Gareth led her from the chamber, the heavy door closing behind them with a resounding thud, Isabel felt a profound sense of isolation. She was alone, adrift in a sea of intrigue and uncertainty. The weight of her father's betrayal, the king's calculating gaze, the whispers of the court, it all pressed down on her, threatening to suffocate her. Sir Gareth walked beside her in silence, his presence both comforting and unsettling. He was a shield against the open hostility of the court, but he was also a reminder of her captivity. They walked through the long, echoing corridors, the only sound their footsteps and the faint rustle of Isabel's gown. Finally, they reached a smaller, less imposing door. Sir Gareth pushed it open, revealing a chamber that was surprisingly welcoming. Sunlight streamed through a large window, illuminating a four-poster bed draped in rich fabrics, a comfortable-looking armchair placed near a crackling fireplace, and a small table laden with fresh fruit and a pitcher of water. These are your chambers, my lady, Sir Gareth said, his voice softening slightly. If you require anything, you need only ask. Isabel looked around the room, a flicker of hope igniting within her. It wasn't Westvale, but it was a refuge. A place where she could, perhaps, find a moment's peace. Thank you, Sir Gareth, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He bowed again, his gaze lingering on hers for a moment longer than necessary. Then, he turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. They sent you here as a pawn, he said, his voice barely a murmur against the silence that now held the room captive. But tell me, my lady, are you willing to become more? And with that, he was gone, leaving Isabel alone with her thoughts, her fears, and the unsettling question that hung heavy in the air. The door closed quietly, leaving a resounding question echo within Isabel's heart. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Royal Court. The first few days at Eldoria Castle were a blur of unfamiliar faces, whispered conversations, and veiled threats. Isabel quickly learned that the royal court was a viper's nest, a place where smiles hid daggers and compliments were laced with poison. Every conversation was a minefield, every gesture a potential misstep. She felt like a bird caught in a gilded cage, surrounded by predators waiting for her to make a mistake. Sir Gareth, true to his word, was a constant presence. He escorted her to meals in the Great Hall, a cavernous space filled with long tables laden with food and drink. He stood guard outside her chambers, his silent presence a deterrent to unwanted visitors. He answered her questions with a patience that surprised her, given his reputation as the king's enforcer. Yet, he remained an enigma, a man of few words and hidden depths. Isabel found herself drawn to the castle's library, a vast collection of scrolls and bound volumes housed in a quiet, sun-drenched chamber. It was a sanctuary, a place where she could escape the suffocating atmosphere of the court and lose herself in the words of long-dead scholars and poets. The scent of old parchment and leather was comforting, a reminder of the small library at Westvale that had been her refuge as a child. One afternoon, while browsing the shelves, she came across a small, leather-bound volume tucked away in a dark corner. It was a history of Eldoria, chronicling the reigns of its kings and queens, their triumphs and their failures. As she flipped through the pages, she came across a passage about King Audric's father, a man known as Audric the Stern. He had been a ruthless ruler, feared by his enemies and his own people alike. He had died under mysterious circumstances, leaving his young son to inherit a kingdom teetering on the brink of chaos. Interesting reading, my lady? Isabel startled, nearly dropping the book. Sir Gareth stood behind her, his expression unreadable. She hadn't heard him approach. Sir Gareth, she said, her voice a little shaky.
You startled me.
He gave a slight bow. My apologies, my lady. I did not mean to intrude. You're not intruding, Isabel said, closing the book. I was just curious about the history of Eldoria. A wise pursuit, Sir Gareth said. Knowledge is a powerful weapon, especially in a place like this. His words sent a shiver down her spine. He knew, of course, the precariousness of her position. He knew that she was surrounded by enemies. Do you enjoy history, Sir Gareth? Isabel asked, trying to steer the conversation away from the dangers of the court. He gave a slight shrug. I prefer to make history, rather than read about it, my lady. But I understand its importance. Isabel studied him, trying to decipher the meaning behind his words. Was he warning her?
Or was he simply stating a fact?
The king seems preoccupied, she said, changing the subject again.
He barely speaks to me.
Sir Gareth's expression remained impassive. The king has many concerns, my lady. The threat of war with Northwood looms large. Your father's loyalty is untested. Isabel felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She knew that her father's ambition was as boundless as his greed. He would not hesitate to betray King Audric if it served his own interests. And she would be the one to pay the price. I am not my father, she said, her voice firm. I would not betray the king. Sir Gareth's gaze met hers, his eyes searching. I believe you, my lady, he said finally. But others may not be so discerning. He paused, then added, Be careful who you trust, Lady Isabel. This court is full of shadows. His words echoed the warnings she had heard from others, whispers in the corridors, glances exchanged in the great hall. She was a stranger in a strange land, surrounded by people who saw her as a pawn, a threat, or simply an inconvenience. I understand, Isabel said, her voice barely a whisper. Sir Gareth nodded, then gestured towards the door. It is time for the evening meal, my lady. Shall we? As they walked towards the great hall, Isabel couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over her. Sir Gareth's warning had confirmed her worst fears. She was in danger, and she had no one to rely on but herself. And perhaps, just perhaps, the silent, watchful knight who walked beside her. The whispers continued, following her through the tapestry-lined corridors. Some dismissed her. Some pitied her. Others, and these were the ones that sent a shiver of fear down her spine, clearly desired to see what might be dislodged, should her footing slip. She gripped her prayer book tightly, her knuckles going white. She needed to find an ally, somewhere, somehow. She needed to find her strength. Chapter 3. The enforcer's gaze. The great hall was a cacophony of noise and activity. Servants bustled between tables, carrying platters of roasted meat, bowls of steaming vegetables, and pitchers of wine. The air was thick with the scent of food, sweat, and perfume. Nobles, dressed in their finest silks and jewels, engaged in lively conversations, their laughter and arguments echoing off the high, vaulted ceiling. Isabel sat at a small table near the back of the hall, Sir Gareth standing silently behind her. She picked at her food, her appetite gone. The opulence of the court, the sheer excess of it all, was overwhelming. At Westvale, meals were simple affairs, shared with family and close retainers. Here it was a performance, a display of wealth and power. She noticed that several of the courtiers were watching her, their gazes curious, speculative. Lady Annalise, the king's sister, was particularly attentive, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Isabel had already learned that Lady Annalise was a formidable woman, known for her quick wit and her even quicker temper. She was also said to be fiercely protective of her brother, the king. As if summoned by her thoughts, Lady Annalise approached Isabel's table, her silk gown rustling softly as she moved. She was a striking woman, with dark hair pulled back in an elaborate braid and eyes that were the same piercing blue as her brother's. "Lady Isabel," she said, her voice smooth as velvet, "I trust you are finding your accommodations to your liking?" Isabel inclined her head. "They are more than adequate, my lady." Lady Annalise smiled, a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "We aim to please. After all, you are a valued guest." The emphasis on valued was not lost on Isabel. She knew that she was being assessed, measured, judged. "I am grateful for the king's hospitality," Isabel said, keeping her voice neutral. Lady Annalise's gaze flickered to Sir Gareth, who stood impassively behind Isabel. "Sir Gareth," she said, "you are taking good care of our guest?" "My lady," Sir Gareth replied, his voice a low rumble, "I am fulfilling my duty to the king." Lady Annalise nodded, her eyes returning to Isabel. "Duty is a noble thing," she said. "But loyalty is even more important." The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. Isabel knew that Lady Annalise was questioning her loyalty, not just to the king, but to the entire kingdom. "My loyalty is to Eldoria," Isabel said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "I would do nothing to harm this kingdom." Lady Annalise studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she gave a slight nod. "We shall see," she said. "We shall see." She turned and walked away, leaving Isabel feeling even more exposed and vulnerable. Sir Gareth leaned down, his voice barely a whisper. "Be careful, my lady. She is not to be underestimated." Isabel nodded, her gaze following Lady Annalise as she rejoined her companions at the high table. The king's sister was clearly a powerful force at court, and Isabel had just made an enemy. Later that evening, as Isabel was preparing for bed, there was a soft knock on her door. She opened it to find Sir Gareth standing there, his expression somber. "My lady," he said, "I need to speak with you." Isabel hesitated, then stepped aside to allow him to enter. He closed the door behind him, the sound echoing in the quiet chamber. "What is it, Sir Gareth?" Isabel asked, her heart pounding in her chest. He looked at her, his gaze intense. "I have been watching you, my lady," he said, "and I have seen something in you that others do not." Isabel felt a blush rise to her cheeks. His words were unexpected, unsettling. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He took a step closer, his proximity making her breath catch in her throat. "I see strength," he said. "I see courage. I see a woman who is not afraid to fight for what she believes in." His words were like a balm to her wounded spirit. He saw her, not as a pawn, but as a person. "But I am afraid," Isabel confessed, her voice trembling. "I am surrounded by enemies." "You are not alone," Sir Gareth said, his voice firm. "I will protect you." His words, spoken with such conviction, sent a wave of warmth through her. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. She saw the lines of weariness around his eyes, the scars that spoke of battles fought and won. She saw a man who was burdened by his duty, but who also possessed a deep sense of honor.
Why?
She asked, her voice barely audible. Why would you risk your life for me? He hesitated, then said, because I believe in you, my lady. I believe that you are more than just a bargaining piece. I believe that you can make a difference. He reached out, his hand gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. The touch sent a shiver through her, a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Something forbidden. Something dangerous. He stepped back, his gaze holding hers. His eyes spoke of a turmoil he kept locked away, a turmoil that mirrored her own. The enforcer's gaze softened, revealing a hint of vulnerability that stole the very air from Isabel's lungs. The moment stretched, fraught with unspoken desires and the weight of their impossible positions. Chapter 4. A Pawn's Gambit. The next morning, Isabel awoke with a newfound sense of determination. Sir Gareth's words had resonated deeply within her. She was not just a pawn, she was a player in this game, and she would play to win. She would not be a victim, she would be a survivor. She dressed carefully, choosing a gown of deep blue, the color of the Eldorian flag. It was a subtle act of defiance, a declaration that she was not afraid to align herself with this kingdom, despite the risks. She also wore a small silver pendant, a gift from her mother, shaped like a falcon in flight. It was a symbol of freedom, a reminder of her own inner strength. As she walked to the great hall for the morning meal, she noticed that the courtiers were watching her with even greater interest than before. Lady Annalise's challenge, and Sir Gareth's subsequent declaration of protection, had clearly not gone unnoticed. Isabel held her head high, her gaze meeting theirs directly. She would not cower. She would not show fear. She found Sir Gareth waiting for her at the entrance to the hall. He gave her a slight nod, his eyes conveying a silent message of support. "My lady," he said, his voice low, "you look radiant." Isabel felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, Sir Gareth," she said. "I feel stronger today." He smiled, a rare and fleeting expression that transformed his face. "That is good to hear, my lady. Strength is what you will need." As they entered the hall, Isabel noticed that King Audric was watching her, his expression thoughtful. He beckoned her to his table. "Lady Isabel," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "join us." Isabel approached the high table, her heart pounding in her chest. This was her chance. She would not waste it. She curtsied before the king, her gaze meeting his directly. "Your Majesty," she said, "I am honored." King Audric gestured to a seat beside him. "We have been discussing the situation with Northwood," he said. "Your father's pledge of support is crucial." Isabel took a deep breath. "Your Majesty," she said, "I understand the importance of my father's alliance. But I also know that he is ambitious. He may not be entirely trustworthy." A murmur went around the table. Lady Annalise's eyes narrowed. Sir Gareth, standing behind Isabel, remained silent, but she could feel his presence, a steadying force. King Audric leaned forward, his gaze intense. "What are you suggesting, Lady Isabel?" "I am suggesting," Isabel said, her voice firm, "that you do not rely solely on my father's word. I am offering myself as an intermediary. I can communicate with him, assess his true intentions, and ensure his loyalty." It was a bold move, a dangerous gambit. She was essentially offering herself as a spy, a double agent. But it was the only way she could see to protect herself and to prove her loyalty to Eldoria. King Audric studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he gave a slight nod. "An interesting proposition, Lady Isabel," he said. "And what makes you think you can succeed where others have failed?" "Because I know my father," Isabel said. "I know his weaknesses, his ambitions, his fears. And I am not afraid to use them against him." A silence fell over the table. The courtiers were watching her with a mixture of shock and admiration. Even Lady Annalise seemed impressed, a grudging respect flickering in her eyes. King Audric smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. "You are a bold woman, Lady Isabel," he said. "And perhaps a valuable asset indeed." He turned to Sir Gareth. "Sir Gareth," he said, "you will continue to protect Lady Isabel." but you will also assist her in her endeavors. You will be her eyes and ears, her sword and shield. Sir Gareth bowed. As you command, Your Majesty. Isabel felt a surge of relief and a flicker of something else excitement. She had taken the first step, made her move. She was no longer just a pawn, she was a player in the game. And with Sir Gareth by her side, she might just have a chance of winning. As the murmurs died down, she became aware of a low, steady hum of approval, a marked difference to the whispers that had followed her before. She had turned their perception.
For now.
The real challenge was only just beginning. Chapter 5. The Weight of a Kingdom. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Isabel, with Sir Gareth's unwavering support, began to navigate the treacherous currents of the Eldorian court. She met with envoys from neighboring kingdoms, attended council meetings, and even accompanied the king on a hunting expedition, a traditional display of strength and unity. She learned to read the subtle cues, the unspoken messages, the shifting alliances that defined the court. She discovered that King Audric, despite his gruff exterior, was a shrewd and calculating ruler, deeply concerned with the welfare of his kingdom. He was also a lonely man, haunted by the legacy of his father and the constant threat of war. Isabel found herself drawn to him, not in a romantic way, but with a sense of empathy and understanding. She saw the weight of the kingdom on his shoulders, the burden of responsibility that he carried alone. She began to offer him her counsel, her insights, her unique perspective as an outsider who was also, in a way, an insider. Sir Gareth, meanwhile, remained her constant companion, her protector, her confidant. He taught her the basics of swordsmanship, the art of self-defense, a skill that might prove necessary in the dangerous world she now inhabited. He also shared with her his knowledge of the court, the secrets and intrigues that lay beneath the surface of polite society. Their relationship deepened, evolving from one of duty and obligation to something more. They shared quiet moments in the library, discussing books and ideas. They walked together in the castle gardens, enjoying the beauty of the flowers and the warmth of the sun. They exchanged glances across crowded rooms, unspoken messages passing between them. Isabel found herself increasingly drawn to Sir Gareth's strength, his loyalty, his quiet intensity. She admired his unwavering commitment to duty, his willingness to risk his life for his king and his kingdom. She also saw the vulnerability that lay beneath his stoic exterior, the pain of past losses, the burden of secrets he carried. One evening, as they were walking along the castle walls, watching the sun set over the distant hills, Isabel turned to Sir Gareth. "You never speak of your past," she said.
Why is that?
He hesitated, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "My past is not a pleasant one, my lady," he said. "It is filled with darkness and regret." "We all have regrets, Sir Gareth," Isabel said softly. "It is what we do with them that matters." He looked at her, his eyes searching. "You are wise beyond your years, my lady," he said. "And you are more than just an enforcer, Sir Gareth," Isabel replied. "You are a man of honor, of compassion, of deep feeling." He smiled, a rare and fleeting expression that made her heart ache. "You see too much, my lady," he said.
Perhaps, Isabel said.
"Or perhaps you hide too well." He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek. The touch sent a shiver through her, a spark of desire that she had been trying to ignore. "I cannot," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I am sworn to the king." "My duty I know," Isabel said, her voice barely a whisper. She understood the constraints, the obligations, the impossible nature of their situation. A knight, sworn to his king. A lady, promised to another. Their love was forbidden, a dangerous flame that could consume them both. He stepped back, his hand dropping to his side. The moment was broken, the spell shattered. The weight of the kingdom, the weight of their respective duties, pressed down on them, separating them, reminding them of the chasm that lay between them. The silence stretched, filled only with the sound of the wind whistling through the battlements and the unspoken knowledge of what could never be. Chapter 6. Beneath the Armor. The following weeks were a delicate dance of duty and desire. Isabel continued her work as the king's intermediary, sending coded messages to her father, carefully worded to both appease him and gather information about his true intentions. Sir Gareth was her constant shadow, his presence a reassurance and a torment. They spoke little of their feelings, the unspoken tension between them a constant hum beneath the surface of their interactions. Isabel found herself spending more and more time in the castle's training yard, watching the knights practice their swordsmanship. She was fascinated by the skill and discipline required, the raw power and grace of the movements. She had always been a skilled rider, but the art of combat was new to her. One afternoon, she found Sir Gareth alone in the yard, practicing with a heavy broadsword. He moved with a fluid grace, his body a symphony of controlled power. The sunlight glinted off his sweat-soaked hair and the muscles of his arms. Isabel watched him, mesmerized. He stopped when he saw her, lowering his sword. "My lady," he said, his voice slightly breathless. "You should not be here. It is not safe." "I wanted to watch," Isabel said, her voice a little shaky. "You are impressive." He gave a slight smile. "It is my duty to be proficient," he said.
It is more than duty, Isabel said.
"You have a gift." He looked at her, his eyes searching. "Do you wish to learn?" he asked.
Isabel hesitated.
It was an unconventional request for a lady to learn the art of combat. But the desire to be strong, to be capable, to be more than just a pawn, was overwhelming. "Yes," she said. "I do." Sir Gareth nodded.
"Then I will teach you," he said. "But it will not be easy.
It will require discipline, dedication, and pain." "I am not afraid of pain," Isabel said, her voice firm. He smiled again, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I believe you, my lady," he said. And so began Isabel's training. Sir Gareth started her with the basics, teaching her how to hold a sword, how to stand, how to move. It was harder than she had expected. The sword was heavy, her muscles ached, and she often stumbled and fell. But she persevered, driven by a desire to prove herself, to be worthy of Sir Gareth's respect. He was a patient teacher, but also a demanding one. He pushed her to her limits, correcting her mistakes, encouraging her when she faltered. He treated her not as a fragile lady, but as a warrior in training. As they trained, their bodies often brushed against each other, their hands touching, their gazes meeting. The physical closeness was intoxicating, a constant reminder of the forbidden attraction that simmered between them. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling session, Isabel collapsed onto a bench, her body exhausted, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Sir Gareth sat beside her, handing her a water skin. "You are improving, my lady," he said. "You have a natural aptitude." Isabel took a long drink, the cool water soothing her parched throat. "Thank you, Sir Gareth," she said. "For everything." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "I do it for you, my lady," he said. "And for Eldoria." The unspoken words hung heavy in the air. "For you." The simple phrase echoed the depth of his feelings, feelings he dared not voice. Isabel reached out, her hand gently touching his arm. She felt the hard muscle beneath his tunic, the warmth of his skin. He did not pull away. "Gareth," she said, his name a whisper on her lips. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if savoring the sound of his name spoken by her. Then he opened them, his gaze filled with a longing that mirrored her own. He leaned closer, his lips brushing against her ear. "Isabel," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. The moment stretched, fraught with unspoken desires, with the knowledge of their impossible situation. Beneath the armor, both literal and figurative, two hearts beat as one, yearning for a connection that was both undeniable and forbidden. The very air crackled with the intensity of their unspoken feelings, trapped by duty, yet fueled by a growing, undeniable love. Chapter 7. Shadows of the Past. The fragile peace they had found in the training yard was shattered by a summons from the king. Isabel and Sir Gareth were called to the royal chambers, where they found King Audric pacing restlessly, his face etched with worry. "The news from Northwood is troubling," he said, his voice grim. "King Oberon is massing his troops on the border. It seems war is inevitable." Isabel felt a chill run down her spine.
"Va."
The word hung heavy in the air, a dark cloud threatening to engulf them all. "What of my father?" Isabel asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Has he responded to your requests?" King Audric shook his head.
"He remains silent," he said.
Which is, in itself, an answer. Isabel knew what that meant. Her father was siding with Northwood, betraying his pledge to Eldoria. And she, as his daughter, would be held accountable. Sir Gareth stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice firm, "we must prepare for the worst. I will gather the troops, strengthen the defenses, and what of Lady Isabel?" King Audric interrupted, his gaze fixed on her. "She is now a liability, a symbol of her father's treachery." Isabel felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She knew that her life was in danger, that she could be imprisoned, or worse, executed as a traitor. Sir Gareth turned to her, his eyes filled with concern. "I will protect her, Your Majesty," he said. "I will not let any harm come to her." King Audric studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Your loyalty is commendable, Sir Gareth," he said. "But it may not be enough." He turned to Isabel. "Lady Isabel," he said, his voice softening slightly, "I know you are not your father. I believe you are innocent of his treachery. But I cannot ignore the political realities. You must leave Eldoria. You must find sanctuary elsewhere." Isabel's heart sank. Exile. She would be forced to leave the only place she had begun to call home, to abandon the man she had come to love. "Where will I go?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I have made arrangements," King Audric said. "You will travel to the monastery of Saint Seraphina, a secluded sanctuary in the mountains. You will be safe there, under the protection of the abbess." The monastery of Saint Seraphina. Isabel had heard of it, a place of peace and contemplation, far from the intrigues of the court. But it was also a place of isolation, a place where she would be cut off from the world, from Gareth. Sir Gareth stepped forward again. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice pleading, "allow me to accompany her. I can protect her on the journey, ensure her safety." King Audric hesitated. "That is a risk," he said. "You are needed here, Sir Gareth. Your skills are invaluable in the coming conflict." "My duty is to protect Lady Isabel," Sir Gareth said, his voice unwavering. "And I will not abandon her." King Audric looked at them, his gaze moving from one to the other. He saw the bond between them, the unspoken love that defied the boundaries of duty and obligation. He sighed. "Very well," he said. "You may accompany her, Sir Gareth. But you must return as soon as she is safely settled. Eldoria needs you." Sir Gareth bowed. "As you command, Your Majesty." Isabel felt a surge of relief, mixed with a profound sadness. She would be safe, but she would be separated from Gareth. The journey to the monastery would be their last time together, a bittersweet farewell. That evening, alone in her chambers, Isabel finally allowed herself to cry. The tears were a release of all of the fear and sorrow she had held bottled up inside for so long. A soft knock on the door startled her. It was Gareth. His face was a reflection of her own sorrow. He spoke of his past, of the battle that had taken his family, of the oath he had sworn to the king, to Eldoria. The shadows of his past were finally revealed, painting a picture of a man who was driven by duty and loyalty, yet haunted by loss. And now, he was facing another potential loss, the loss of her. Chapter 8. The Falcon and the Dove. The journey to the monastery of Saint Seraphina was long and arduous. Isabel and Sir Gareth traveled with a small escort of guards, their pace slow and deliberate, dictated by the rugged terrain and the ever-present threat of bandits or Northwood scouts. They rode for days through dense forests, across windswept plains, and over treacherous mountain passes. The landscape was breathtakingly beautiful, but Isabel could barely appreciate it. Her heart was heavy with the knowledge that each passing day brought her closer to her destination, and further away from Gareth. They spoke little during the journey, the unspoken sadness hanging heavy between them. But their shared glances, their brief touches, their silent understanding, spoke volumes. They were two souls connected by a bond that defied words, a love that was both undeniable and impossible. One evening, They camped near a small, clear stream. The air was crisp and cool, the sky a tapestry of stars. They sat by the campfire, the flames casting flickering shadows on their faces. Isabel pulled the silver falcon pendant from beneath her tunic, holding it in her hand. "My mother gave me this," she said, her voice soft. She said it represented freedom, the ability to soar above the troubles of the world. Sir Gareth looked at the pendant, his gaze thoughtful. "A fitting symbol for you, my lady," he said. "You have a spirit that cannot be caged."
Isabel smiled sadly.
"But I feel caged, Gareth," she said. "Trapped by my father's actions, by my own feelings." He reached out, his hand gently covering hers. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through her. "You are not trapped, Isabel," he said. "You have choices. You can choose to be a victim, or you can choose to be free." "And what of you, Gareth?" Isabel asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What are your choices?" He hesitated, his gaze fixed on the flames. "My choices are limited," he said. "I am sworn to the king, to Eldoria." "My duty is not everything," Isabel said. "There is also love." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a longing that mirrored her own. "Love is a luxury I cannot afford, Isabel," he said. "It is a weakness that would endanger us both. Or it could be our strength," Isabel said. "Our reason to fight, to survive." He shook his head. "It is too dangerous," he said. "We must not," he stopped, unable to finish the sentence. The unspoken words hung heavy in the air. "We must not love each other." Isabel leaned closer, her hand reaching up to touch his face. She traced the line of his jaw, the scar above his eyebrow, the curve of his lips. "I am not afraid, Gareth," she said. "I am not afraid to love you." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if savoring her touch, her words. Then he opened them, his gaze filled with a raw emotion that took her breath away. He leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was both tender and desperate. It was a kiss that spoke of longing, of regret, of a love that could never be fully realized. It was a kiss that sealed their fate, a promise of heartbreak and enduring devotion. When they finally broke apart, the world seemed to have shifted on its axis. The stars shone brighter, the air was sweeter, the fire burned hotter. But the reality of their situation remained, a cold, hard truth that could not be ignored. He pulled back first. "We must be strong, Isabel. For Eldoria." She nodded. He was right. He always was. She reached up, tracing the line of the scar above his brow. It was a physical manifestation of all he had endured, a map of his life etched onto his very skin. "The falcon and the dove," she mused quietly, her fingers lingering on the scar. "What was that, my lady?" he asked, drawing back slightly. "We are the falcon and the dove," she clarified. "Destined to be together, yet forever apart. One soaring above the battle, the other a symbol of peace that can never truly be attained, so long as the war rages on." He understood, and the unspoken understanding was a weight and a comfort all at once. Chapter 9. A Dance of Deception. The monastery of St. Seraphina was a haven of tranquility, nestled high in the mountains, surrounded by towering peaks and ancient forests. The air was thin and crisp, the silence broken only by the chanting of the monks and the gentle murmur of the wind. The buildings were made of gray stone, simple but elegant, reflecting the austere beauty of the surroundings. Isabel was welcomed by the abbess, a woman of serene wisdom and quiet strength. She was given a small, sparsely furnished cell, a stark contrast to the opulent chambers she had occupied at Eldoria Castle. But she found a strange comfort in the simplicity, in the absence of the court's endless intrigues and pressures. Sir Gareth stayed with her for a few days, ensuring her safety and helping her settle in. He explored the monastery grounds, familiarizing himself with the layout, the defenses, the potential threats. He spoke with the monks, assessing their capabilities, their loyalty. He also spent every possible moment with Isabel, their time together precious and fleeting. They walked in the monastery gardens, discussing their hopes and fears, their dreams and regrets. They shared stolen kisses in the shadows of the ancient cloisters, their love a secret flame burning bright in the face of adversity. But the time came, inevitably, for Gareth to return to Eldoria. The king needed him, the kingdom was at war, and his duty called. Their farewell was heartbreaking, a silent promise of enduring love and a painful acknowledgement of the obstacles that lay between them. "I will return," Gareth said, his voice rough with emotion. "I swear it." "And I will be waiting," Isabel replied, her voice trembling. He kissed her one last time, a kiss that was both a farewell and a vow. Then, he mounted his horse and rode away, disappearing into the mist that shrouded the mountain pass. Isabel watched him go, her heart aching with a profound sense of loss. She was alone again, but she was not defeated. She had a purpose, a mission. She would use her time at the monastery to gather information, to communicate with her contacts at court, to help Gareth and King Audric in any way she could. She began to attend the daily services, listening to the monks' prayers, observing their routines. She also spent hours in the monastery library, poring over ancient texts, searching for clues, for any information that might be useful. She discovered that the monastery was not as isolated as it seemed. It had a network of contacts throughout the kingdom, messengers who came and went, carrying news and information. She also learned that the abbess was a shrewd and politically astute woman, with a deep understanding of the workings of the court. Isabel began to cultivate a relationship with the abbess, sharing her concerns, her fears, her hopes for Eldoria. She also revealed her connection to Sir Gareth, her love for him, her determination to help him in any way she could. The abbess listened patiently, offering her wisdom and guidance. She did not judge Isabel for her forbidden love. She understood the complexities of the human heart. "You are playing a dangerous game, my child," the abbess said. "But you are playing it with courage and grace." "I have no choice," Isabel said. "I must do what I can to protect the man I love, and the kingdom I have come to care for." "Then you must be cunning," the abbess said. "You must be like a dancer in a masked ball, moving gracefully, concealing your true intentions, revealing only what you want others to see."
Isabel nodded.
She understood. She would become a master of deception, a spy in the service of love and loyalty. She would use her skills, her intelligence, her connections, to help Gareth and King Audric win the war, and to secure a future for them all. The dance had begun, and the steps were treacherous. A letter, intercepted. A coded message, sent. A whispered conversation, overheard. Isabel's work at the monastery began in earnest. Chapter 10. The Price of Loyalty. Weeks turned into months. Isabel settled into the rhythm of life at the monastery, her days filled with prayer, study, and clandestine communication. She received regular updates from Gareth, coded messages delivered by trusted messengers. He wrote of the ongoing war, the battles fought, the victories won, the losses suffered. He also wrote of his longing for her, his unwavering love, his hope for a future that seemed increasingly distant. Isabel responded in kind, sharing her own observations, her insights, her fears. She also sent him information she had gleaned from the monastery's network of contacts, details about troop movements, supply lines, and potential alliances. She learned that her father, Lord Elmsworth, had openly declared his support for King Oberon, leading his troops into battle against Eldoria. She also discovered that he was planning a secret attack on a strategically important fortress, a move that could cripple Eldoria's defenses. Isabel knew that she had to warn Gareth, but she also knew that revealing her father's treachery would put her own life in danger. She was torn between her loyalty to her family and her love for Gareth and Eldoria. She confided in the abbess, seeking her guidance. The abbess listened patiently, her wise eyes filled with compassion. "You are facing a difficult choice, my child," the abbess said. "But you must follow your heart. You must do what you believe is right, regardless of the consequences." Isabel knew what she had to do. She wrote a detailed letter to Gareth, revealing her father's plans, warning him of the impending attack. She entrusted the letter to a trusted messenger, a young monk who had sworn to serve the monastery and its allies. The messenger left under cover of darkness, carrying the fate of Eldoria in his hands. Isabel waited anxiously for news, her heart pounding with fear and anticipation. Days later, a response arrived. Gareth's handwriting was hurried, his words terse. Your information was invaluable. We were able to repel the attack, saving the fortress. Your father was captured. You are a hero, Isabel. But you are also in danger.
Stay hidden.
I will come for you when it is safe. Isabel felt a surge of relief, mixed with a profound sadness. Her father was a prisoner, his ambitions thwarted, his life in ruins. She had betrayed him, but she had also saved countless lives, protected the kingdom she had come to love. But Gareth's warning echoed in her mind.
Stay hidden.
She was still a target, a pawn in the ongoing game of power. Her enemies would not rest until she was silenced. The abbess, sensing her fear, offered her comfort.
You have done what is right, my child, she said.
You have proven your loyalty, your courage, your strength. But at what price? Isabel asked, her voice trembling. I have lost my father, my family, my home. You have gained something more valuable, the abbess said. You have found your true self, your true purpose. And you have earned the love of a good man. Isabel nodded, her eyes filling with tears. The price of loyalty was high, but she was willing to pay it. She had chosen love over family, duty over blood. And in doing so, she had discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. The price was steep, but her decision was clear. The waiting, however, was the hardest part. Every creak of the monastery doors, every unfamiliar footstep, sent a jolt of fear through her. She was a lioness in hiding, waiting for her mate to return. Chapter 11. Echoes in the Cloisters. The quiet sanctuary of the monastery became a prison of a different kind. Isabel's days were marked by a gnawing anxiety, a constant fear for Gareth's safety, and a growing unease about her own future. The peaceful routines of prayer and contemplation were now punctuated by the echoes of her own worries, amplified by the silence of the cloisters. She continued her work, deciphering messages, gathering information, and sending reports to Gareth through the abbess's trusted network. But the act of writing his name, of sending her love and support across the miles, only served to heighten her longing for him. One evening, as she was walking in the monastery gardens, she noticed a figure standing in the shadows of the ancient olive trees. It was a woman, dressed in the simple robes of a novice. But there was something familiar about her, something that made Isabel's heart skip a beat. As she approached, the woman turned, revealing her face. It was Lady Annalise, the king's sister.
Isabel Gast.
Lady Annalise, she said. What are you doing here? Lady Annalise smiled, a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. I came to see you, Lady Isabel, she said. To deliver a message. Isabel felt a chill run down her spine. Lady Annalise had always been suspicious of her, had seen her as a threat. What message could she possibly bring? What message? Isabel asked, her voice guarded. Lady Annalise stepped closer, her gaze intense. The king has been wounded, she said. In battle. He is gravely ill. Isabel's heart sank. King Audric, the man she had come to respect and admire, was on the brink of death. And without his leadership, Eldoria was vulnerable. And Gareth? Isabel asked, her voice barely a whisper. What of Gareth? Lady Annalise's expression shifted, a flicker of something crossing her face. It was not sympathy, nor was it satisfaction. It was calculation. Sir Gareth is leading the troops, she said. He is holding the kingdom together. But he needs help. What kind of help? Isabel asked, her suspicion growing. Lady Annalise smiled again, that same unsettling smile. He needs you, she said. He needs your influence, your connections. He needs you to rally the troops, to inspire them, to lead them. Isabel was stunned. Lady Annalise was asking her to return to Eldoria, to the very place she had been forced to flee. It was a trap, surely. A way to eliminate her, to remove the last obstacle to her own ambition. I cannot, Isabel said. I am in hiding. I am a traitor's daughter. You are also the woman Sir Gareth loves, Lady Annalise said, her voice sharp. The woman who saved the fortress, who proved her loyalty to Eldoria. You are the only one who can save him. Her words struck a chord. Gareth needed her. Eldoria needed her. She could not hide in the monastery, waiting for the war to end, for her fate to be decided. She had to act. I will go, Isabel said, her voice firm. But I will not go alone. I will need protection. Lady Annalise nodded. I will provide an escort, she said. A small group of loyal knights. They will protect you and ensure your safe arrival. Isabel knew that she was walking into a trap, that Lady Annalise's motives were far from pure. But she had no choice. She had to risk everything for Gareth, for Eldoria, for the love that burned brighter than any fear. The cloisters seemed to echo with the weight of her decision, a decision that could lead to her salvation or her doom. As Lady Annalise turned to go, she paused, a strange light in her eyes. The king spoke of you often, Lady Isabel, she said, her voice a soft whisper in the gathering dusk. He saw something in you, something he had lost in himself long ago. Chapter 12. A Knight's Confession. The journey back to Eldoria was fraught with tension. Isabel rode with Lady Annalise's escort, a group of silent, grim-faced knights who treated her with a mixture of suspicion and respect. She knew that they were loyal to Lady Annalise, not to her, and that they would not hesitate to betray her if it served their mistress's purpose. She kept her thoughts to herself, her fears hidden beneath a mask of calm composure. She focused on Gareth, on the hope of seeing him again, on the possibility of helping him save Eldoria. They traveled swiftly, avoiding the main roads, sticking to hidden paths and trails. The landscape was scarred by war, the fields burned, the villages deserted, the air thick with a stench of death. Isabel saw firsthand the devastation that her father's treachery had wrought, the suffering that had been inflicted on the people of Eldoria. As they neared the capital, the tension grew even thicker. The city was under siege, surrounded by Northwood troops. The sounds of battle echoed in the distance, the smoke from burning buildings staining the sky. Lady Annalise's escort led Isabel through a secret passage, a hidden tunnel that led beneath the city walls and into the castle. They emerged in a dark, deserted courtyard, the silence broken only by the distant sounds of fighting. Isabel was led to a small, sparsely furnished chamber, a stark reminder of her former status as a prisoner. She was told to wait, that Gareth would be summoned. She paced restlessly, her heart pounding in her chest. She was back in Eldoria, back in the Viper's Nest, surrounded by enemies. But she was also closer to Gareth than she had been in months. Finally, the door opened, and he stood there. He looked weary, his face etched with the lines of exhaustion and battle. But his eyes, when they met hers, lit up with a joy that transcended all the darkness and despair. Isabel, he said, his voice rough with emotion. He rushed towards her, taking her in his arms, holding her tight, as if he would never let her go. She clung to him, burying her face in his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and steel and sweat. You came, he said, his voice muffled against her hair. You risked everything. I had to, Isabel said, her voice trembling. I had to see you. I had to help. He pulled back, his hands cupping her face, his eyes searching hers. You are safe? He asked. They did not harm you? I am safe, Isabel said. For now. He kissed her then, a kiss that was both passionate and desperate, a kiss that spoke of longing and fear and enduring love. It was a kiss that banished the shadows, if only for a moment. When they finally broke apart, Gareth looked at her, his expression serious. The king is dying, he said. He has named me regent. Until he recovers, or he didn't finish the sentence, but Isabel understood. Gareth was now the ruler of Eldoria, the man responsible for leading the kingdom through its darkest hour. And Lady Annalise? Isabel asked, her voice cautious. Gareth's expression darkened. She is ambitious, he said. She believes she should be queen. She will try to use you, to control you, to eliminate you. I know, Isabel said. I am not afraid of her. Gareth smiled, a weary but genuine smile. You are the bravest woman I know, Isabel, he said. And the most beautiful. He leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear. I love you, Isabel, he whispered. I have loved you from the moment I saw you, standing in that courtroom, defying the king, defying the world. It was the confession she had longed to hear, the words that validated her own feelings, that gave her strength and hope. The knight's confession, spoken in the heart of a besieged castle, was a beacon of light in the encroaching darkness. Chapter 13. The Gathering Storm. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Gareth's shoulders. As regent, he was tasked with leading the defense of Eldoria, negotiating with allies, and maintaining order within the besieged city. He worked tirelessly, sleeping little, eating less, driven by his duty to his kingdom and his love for Isabel. Isabel, too, found herself thrust into a new role. She was no longer just a pawn or a spy or a lover in hiding. She was a leader, a confidant, a symbol of hope for the people of Eldoria. She met with the city's elders, listening to their concerns, offering her support, and reassuring them that Gareth would not abandon them. She visited the wounded soldiers, tending to their injuries, offering them comfort, and praising their bravery. She even rallied the women of the city, organizing them to provide food, supplies, and medical care for the troops. She quickly discovered that she had a natural talent for leadership, a charisma that inspired others, a strength that drew people to her. She was no longer just Lady Isabel of Westvale, the trader's daughter. She was Isabel of Eldoria, the woman who stood beside the regent, the woman who gave hope to a kingdom on the brink of collapse. But the situation was dire. The Northwood army, bolstered by Lord Elmsworth's troops, was vast and well-equipped. They had laid siege to the city, cutting off supplies, bombarding the walls, and launching wave after wave of attacks. Gareth, despite his best efforts, was struggling to hold the line. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. He confided in Isabel, sharing his fears, his doubts, his frustrations. He told her that he was considering a desperate gamble, a last-ditch effort to break the siege and save the kingdom. I am going to lead a sortie, he said, his voice grim. A small group of knights, under cover of darkness. We will attack the Northwood camp, disrupt their supply lines, and create a diversion. Isabel's heart sank. It was a suicide mission, a desperate gamble that could easily end in disaster. It's too dangerous, she said. You cannot risk your life like this. I have no choice, Gareth said. It is the only way to save Eldoria. There must be another way, Isabel pleaded. A way to negotiate, to compromise. Gareth shook his head. King Oberon is ruthless, he said. He will not negotiate. He will not compromise. He wants Eldoria, and he will not rest until he has it. Isabel knew that he was right. She had seen the brutality of the Northwood army, the cruelty of King Oberon. There was no reasoning with him, no appealing to his sense of decency. Then I will go with you, Isabel said, her voice firm. Gareth looked at her, his eyes filled with shock and disbelief.
No, he said.
Absolutely not. It is too dangerous. I will not allow it. I am not asking for your permission, Isabel said. I am telling you. I am going with you. I will not sit here, waiting for news of your death. I will fight beside you, until the very end. Gareth stared at her, his gaze filled with a mixture of admiration and despair. He knew that he could not dissuade her, that her determination was as strong as his own. The storm was gathering, the final battle looming. Isabel and Gareth, united by love and loyalty, prepared to face their destiny together. The night was dark, the air thick with anticipation, the silence broken only by the whispers of soldiers preparing for the impossible. Chapter 14. Fires of Rebellion. The night of the sortie was dark and moonless, the sky a blanket of thick clouds. The air was cold and damp, the silence broken only by the distant sounds of the Northwood army. Gareth, dressed in full battle armor, his face grim and determined, addressed his small band of knights. They were the best of Eldoria's warriors, hand-picked for their skill, their courage, and their loyalty. We ride for Eldoria, he said, his voice low but firm. We ride for our homes, our families, our freedom. We ride for victory. His words were met with a roar of approval. the knights raising their swords in a defiant salute. Isabel, dressed in a simple leather tunic and breeches, her hair pulled back in a tight braid, stood beside Gareth. She carried a sword, a gift from Gareth, its weight a reminder of the danger that lay ahead. She also carried a small pouch filled with healing herbs and bandages, a testament to her other role as a healer, a comforter. Gareth looked at her, his eyes filled with love and concern. "Are you sure about this, Isabel?" he asked.
"It is not too late to turn back."
"I am sure," Isabel said, her voice steady.
"I will not leave your side."
He smiled, a fleeting but genuine smile.
"Then let us ride," he said.
They mounted their horses, the knights forming a tight formation around them. They rode out of the city through a secret gate, their movements silent and stealthy. They reached the Northwood camp without being detected, the darkness and the element of surprise on their side. They launched their attack with a fury that caught the enemy completely off guard. The battle was fierce and brutal, a chaotic melee of swords and spears, of shouts and screams, of blood and death. Gareth fought like a man possessed, his sword a blur of motion, cutting down enemy soldiers left and right. Isabel fought beside him, her own sword skills surprisingly effective, her courage unwavering. But the Northwood army was vast, and the Eldorian knights were heavily outnumbered. One by one, they began to fall, their bodies littering the ground. Isabel saw a Northwood soldier charging towards Gareth, his sword raised to strike. She reacted instinctively, throwing herself in front of Gareth, taking the blow meant for him. The sword pierced her shoulder, the pain searing through her body. She cried out, stumbling backwards, her sword falling from her hand. Gareth saw her fall, his heart leaping into his throat. He roared with rage, turning on the Northwood soldier, his sword striking with deadly force. The soldier fell, his life extinguished in an instant. Gareth rushed to Isabel's side, kneeling beside her, his face filled with anguish.
"Isabel," he cried.
"Are you all right?" Isabel clutched her shoulder, her face contorted with pain. I think so," she said, her voice weak. "It's just a flesh wound." Gareth ripped a strip of cloth from his tunic, binding her wound tightly. "You saved my life," he said, his voice trembling. "And you mine," Isabel said, her voice barely a whisper. The battle raged on, the outcome uncertain. But the fires of rebellion had been lit, the Eldorian knights fighting with a renewed sense of purpose, inspired by Isabel's courage and Gareth's leadership. As the first rays of dawn began to pierce the darkness, the tide of the battle began to turn. Explosions rocked the Northwood camp. Isabel's plan, implemented before the sortie. The diversion was working. Chapter 15. The Lioness Awakens. The explosions within the Northwood camp had the desired effect. Chaos erupted among the enemy ranks, their carefully laid siege lines crumbling under the unexpected assault. Gareth, seeing the opportunity, rallied his remaining knights for a final, desperate charge. Isabel, despite her wound, refused to be left behind. With her arm bound tightly to her chest, she mounted her horse, her face pale but determined. She would not let Gareth face this danger alone. They charged into the heart of the Northwood camp, their swords flashing in the pre-dawn light. The enemy soldiers, disoriented and demoralized by the explosions and the ferocity of the attack, began to fall back. Gareth, a whirlwind of steel and fury, cut a path through the enemy ranks, his eyes fixed on King Oberon's banner, the symbol of Northwood's power. He knew that if he could capture the banner, he could break the siege and save Eldoria. Isabel, fighting alongside him, found a renewed strength, fueled by adrenaline and love. She defended Gareth's back, parrying blows, deflecting attacks, her courage a beacon to the other Eldorian knights. But the Northwood soldiers were not easily defeated. They rallied, forming a wall of shields and spears, determined to protect their king and their banner. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the chaos, riding a massive warhorse, his armor gleaming in the dim light. It was Lord Elmsworth, Isabel's father. He charged towards Gareth, his sword raised, his face contorted with rage. "Traitor," he roared. "You will pay for your betrayal."
Isabel gasped.
She had hoped that her father had been captured, imprisoned, but here he was, fighting for the enemy, his hatred for Gareth burning brighter than ever. Gareth met Lord Elmsworth's charge, their swords clashing with a deafening clang. They fought fiercely, their skills evenly matched, their hatred for each other fueling their every move. Isabel watched in horror, torn between her loyalty to her father and her love for Gareth. She knew that she could not interfere, that she had to let the battle play out, regardless of the outcome. But then, she saw Lord Elmsworth raise his sword for a killing blow, his eyes filled with murderous intent. Gareth was momentarily off balance, his guard down.
Isabel reacted instinctively.
She spurred her horse forward, riding between the two combatants, her own sword raised. "Father, no,"
she cried.
Lord Elmsworth hesitated, his sword hovering in the air. He looked at Isabel, his daughter, the child he had betrayed, the woman who now stood between him and his vengeance. His expression shifted, a flicker of something crossing his face. It was not regret, nor was it remorse. It was recognition. He lowered his sword. "Isabel," he said, his voice hoarse. But it was too late. A Northwood soldier, seeing an opportunity, charged towards Lord Elmsworth, his spear thrusting forward. The spear pierced Lord Elmsworth's armor, striking him in the chest. He gasped, his eyes widening in shock and pain. He fell from his horse, his body landing with a sickening thud. Isabel screamed, her heart breaking. She dismounted, rushing to her father's side, kneeling beside him. "Father," she cried.
"No."
Lord Elmsworth looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and something else. Something that looked like apology. "Isabel," he whispered. He tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. His eyes closed and he went still. Isabel wept, cradling her father's lifeless body in her arms. She had lost him, not to the war, but to the hatred and ambition that had consumed him. The lioness had awakened, but at a terrible cost. Her roar was a lament, a cry of grief for the father she had lost, and a vow of vengeance for the kingdom she would save. Chapter 16. Scars of Trust. The death of Lord Elmsworth, though a personal tragedy for Isabel, proved to be a turning point in the battle. The Northwood soldiers, witnessing the fall of one of their leaders, lost their will to fight. Their lines broke, and they began to retreat in disarray. Gareth, seeing the opportunity, pressed the attack, driving the enemy back from the city walls. The siege was broken, Eldoria was saved. But the victory was bittersweet. Isabel mourned the loss of her father, despite his betrayal. She also carried the physical and emotional scars of the battle, her wounded shoulder a constant reminder of the price of freedom. Gareth, too, was wounded, both physically and emotionally. He had killed a man who was Isabel's father, a man who had once been a respected lord. He carried the weight of that act, the guilt and the regret, despite knowing that it had been necessary to save Eldoria. They returned to the city, greeted as heroes, their courage and leadership hailed by the people. But the celebrations were muted, the joy tempered by the losses suffered, the wounds that would take time to heal. Isabel, despite her grief, knew that she had to be strong, for Gareth, for Eldoria. She had to help him rebuild the kingdom, to heal the wounds of war, to forge a new future. But the trust between them had been tested. The shadow of Lord Elmsworth's death hung between them, a silent reminder of the complexities of their relationship, the sacrifices they had made, the loyalties they had betrayed. One evening, as they were standing on the castle walls, watching the sun set over the recovering city, Isabel turned to Gareth. "Do you regret it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Killing my father?" Gareth looked at her, his eyes filled with pain. "I regret that it was necessary," he said. "I regret that it caused you pain. But I do not regret saving Eldoria."
Isabel nodded.
She understood. She had made the same choice, the same sacrifice.
"I know," she said.
"And I do not blame you." He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek. "You are remarkable, Isabel," he said. "You have endured so much, and yet you remain strong, compassionate, forgiving." "I have learned from you," Isabel said. You have taught me the meaning of duty, of loyalty, of love. He leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was both tender and passionate, a kiss that spoke of healing and hope, of a love that had endured the trials of war and betrayal. But the scars remained, a constant reminder of the past, a challenge to the future. Lady Annalise, watching from the shadows, saw the exchange. Her ambition, fueled by the king's continued weakness, began to take a new, more dangerous form. The trust between Isabel and Gareth was a bond she needed to break, a force she needed to control. She began to sow seeds of doubt, whispering rumors, manipulating events, playing on the lingering tensions and uncertainties. The scars of trust, both visible and invisible, became the new battlefield. Chapter 17. The Edge of Dawn. The days following the lifting of the siege were a blur of activity. Gareth, as regent, worked tirelessly to restore order, rebuild the city, and negotiate peace terms with the remnants of the Northwood army. He proved to be a capable and compassionate leader, earning the respect and loyalty of the people of Eldoria. Isabel, despite her grief and her injuries, supported Gareth in every way she could. She used her influence to rally the nobles, to secure supplies, and to comfort the wounded and the bereaved. She was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, love and courage could prevail. But the threat of Lady Annalise loomed large. She had not given up on her ambition to claim the throne. She continued to plot and scheme, using her influence and her network of spies to undermine Gareth's authority and to sow discord among the people. She saw Isabel as her main obstacle, the woman who stood between her and her goal. She began to spread rumors, whispering that Isabel was a traitor's daughter, that she could not be trusted, that she was manipulating Gareth for her own gain. Isabel was aware of Lady Annalise's machinations, but she refused to be intimidated. She knew that she had earned the trust of Gareth and the people of Eldoria, and she would not let Lady Annalise's lies destroy everything she had worked for. One evening, as Isabel was walking in the castle gardens, she was confronted by Lady Annalise. "You think you have one, don't you?" Lady Annalise said, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you have secured your place beside the regent, that you will be queen." Isabel met her gaze directly. "I have no desire to be queen," she said. "I only want what is best for Eldoria, for Gareth." "Lies," Lady Annalise spat. "You are a manipulator, a deceiver, just like your father." Isabel felt a surge of anger, but she controlled it. She would not let Lady Annalise provoke her into making a mistake. "My father made his choices," Isabel said, "and he paid the price. I have made my own choices, and I will stand by them." "You will regret those choices," Lady Annalise said. "You will lose everything." She turned and walked away, leaving Isabel standing alone in the gathering dusk. Isabel knew that Lady Annalise was a dangerous enemy, that she would stop at nothing to achieve her goals. But she also knew that she had Gareth's love and support, and that together, they could overcome any obstacle. She returned to the castle, finding Gareth in his study, poring over maps and reports. He looked up as she entered, his face etched with weariness. "Isabel," he said, his voice softening. "I was worried about you." "I am fine," Isabel said. "Just dealing with Lady Annalise." Gareth sighed. "She is a persistent problem," he said. "But we will not let her win." He reached out, taking her hand, his touch sending a wave of warmth through her. "We have come this far, Isabel," he said. "We have faced so much, and we have survived. We will not let anything or anyone tear us apart." Isabel nodded, her heart filled with a renewed sense of hope. They were on the edge of dawn, the darkness of war and betrayal giving way to the promise of a new beginning. But the final battle, the battle for the soul of Eldoria, was yet to come. As they held each other, the faint sound of approaching horses could be heard in the distance. Messengers? Or something more sinister? The edge of dawn was also the edge of uncertainty. Chapter 18. A Kingdom Divided. The approaching horses belonged to a delegation of nobles from the northern provinces, loyalists who had resisted King Oberon's rule and had now come to pledge their support to Gareth and Eldoria. Their arrival was a welcome boost to morale, a sign that the kingdom was not as divided as Lady Annalise had hoped. Gareth received the delegation in the Great Hall, Isabel at his side. The nobles, impressed by Gareth's leadership and Isabel's courage, swore their fealty, promising to provide troops and supplies to help rebuild the kingdom. But the unity was fragile. Lady Annalise, sensing that her opportunity was slipping away, made her move. She spread rumors that Gareth was planning to marry Isabel, a traitor's daughter, a woman who could not be trusted. She argued that such a union would alienate the loyal nobles, that it would weaken Eldoria, that it would be a betrayal of King Audric's legacy. Her words found fertile ground among some of the nobles, particularly those who had always been suspicious of Isabel, those who had secretly harbored ambitions of their own. The kingdom began to divide, factions forming, loyalties shifting. Gareth, aware of the growing unrest, tried to reassure the nobles, to convince them that his love for Isabel was not a threat to Eldoria, that it was a source of strength, a symbol of unity. But Lady Annalise's poison had already taken root. A group of nobles, led by Lord Beaumont, a man known for his ruthless ambition and his close ties to Lady Annalise, openly challenged Gareth's authority. They demanded that Gareth renounce his intention to marry Isabel, that he choose a bride from a noble family, a woman who could unite the kingdom, not divide it. Gareth refused. He would not betray his love for Isabel, he would not sacrifice his happiness for political expediency. The tension escalated, the Great Hall becoming a battleground of words and wills. The kingdom stood on the brink of civil war, the fragile peace shattered by Lady Annalise's machinations. Isabel, witnessing the unfolding crisis, knew that she had to act. She could not let her love for Gareth destroy Eldoria. She could not let Lady Annalise win. She stepped forward, her voice ringing out across the hall. "My lords," she said, "I understand your concerns. I know that I am a controversial figure. I am a traitor's daughter, a woman who has defied tradition." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the faces of the assembled nobles. "But I love Eldoria," she continued. "I love Gareth, and I will not let my personal feelings endanger this kingdom." She turned to Gareth, her eyes filled with tears. "Gareth," she said, "I release you from your promise.
I will not marry you.
I will leave Eldoria, if necessary. I will do whatever it takes to ensure the peace." It was a selfless act, a sacrifice of her own happiness for the good of the kingdom. It was a move that stunned the nobles, silenced Lady Annalise, and broke Gareth's heart. The kingdom was divided, not by war, but by love and loyalty, by ambition and betrayal. Isabel's sacrifice had averted a civil war, but it had also created a chasm between her and Gareth, a wound that might never heal. A hush fell over the Great Hall. Even Lady Annalise seemed taken aback by the magnitude of Isabel's declaration. It was a victory and a defeat, all in one. Chapter 19. The Heart's Citadel. Gareth was devastated by Isabel's declaration. He had not expected her to sacrifice their love, to renounce their future together. He understood her motives, her desire to protect Eldoria, but he could not accept her decision. He tried to speak, to protest, but Isabel silenced him with a look. She had made her choice, and she would not waver. The nobles, stunned by Isabel's selflessness, began to reconsider their position. They had been manipulated by Lady Annalise, blinded by their own ambitions and prejudices. They had not seen Isabel's true character, her courage, her loyalty, her love for Eldoria. Lord Beaumont, sensing that the tide had turned, tried to salvage the situation. "Lady Isabel's sacrifice is commendable," he said, "but it does not change the political realities. The regent must marry appropriately." But his words fell on deaf ears. The other nobles, moved by Isabel's act of selflessness, began to murmur their disapproval. They had seen the true measure of the woman, and they were ashamed of their own behavior. One by one, they began to pledge their support to Gareth, to reaffirm their loyalty to Eldoria. They recognized that Isabel's love for Gareth was not a weakness, but a strength, a symbol of hope and unity. Lady Annalise, seeing her plans crumbling, made a final, desperate attempt to regain control. She rose to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "You are fools,"
she cried.
"You are being deceived by a traitor's daughter. She is manipulating you, just like she manipulated the regent." But her words were met with silence. The nobles had made their choice. They would stand with Gareth and Isabel, with love and loyalty, against ambition and betrayal. Gareth, finally finding his voice, turned to Isabel. "Isabel," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "I will not let you go. I will not let you sacrifice your happiness for me, for Eldoria." He stepped forward, taking her hand, his touch sending a wave of warmth through her. "I love you, Isabel," he said, "and I will marry you, regardless of the consequences. I will stand by you, always." His words were a declaration of love, a vow of unwavering devotion. They were a testament to the power of their bond, a bond that had been tested by war, by betrayal, by sacrifice, but had emerged stronger than ever. The nobles, witnessing their love, their commitment, their courage, cheered their approval. The great hall, which had been a scene of division and discord, was now filled with a sense of unity and hope. King Audric, weakened but alive, had been watching in silence. A faint smile crossed his lips. The strength of their love, not the force of arms, had rallied his kingdom. Lady Annalise, defeated and isolated, fled the hall, her dreams of power shattered, her ambition thwarted. Gareth and Isabel, united by love and loyalty, had saved Eldoria, not through force of arms, but through the strength of their hearts. The Heart Citadel, the fortress of their love, had proven to be the strongest defense of all. The cheers echoed, not just within the walls of the great hall, but throughout the recovering kingdom. The true battle had been won, not on the fields of war, but within the chambers of the heart. Chapter 20. The Reckoning of Love and Duty. The threat of civil war averted, Gareth and Isabel focused on rebuilding Eldoria. They worked tirelessly, side by side, addressing the needs of the people, restoring order, and strengthening the kingdom's defenses. King Audric, though still weak, had recovered enough to resume some of his duties. He was deeply grateful to Gareth and Isabel for their service, for their loyalty, for their love. He recognized that they were the future of Eldoria, the leaders who would guide the kingdom to a new era of peace and prosperity. He summoned Gareth and Isabel to his chambers, his voice weak but firm. "You have saved Eldoria," he said. "You have proven yourselves to be worthy leaders, worthy of my trust, worthy of each other." He paused, his gaze moving from one to the other. "I have been foolish," he continued. "I have allowed fear and prejudice to cloud my judgment. I have underestimated the power of love." He smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his weary face. "I give you my blessing," he said. "Marry and be happy, and rule Eldoria wisely." His words were a benediction, a release from the burdens of the past, a promise of a brighter future. Gareth and Isabel, overwhelmed with emotion, knelt before the king, thanking him for his trust, for his forgiveness, for his blessing. But the reckoning of love and duty was not yet complete. Lady Annalise, though defeated, had not given up. She had fled to the northern provinces, where she was gathering support from disgruntled nobles, from those who still harbored ambitions of their own, from those who resented Gareth's rule. She was planning a rebellion, a final, desperate attempt to seize power, to overthrow Gareth and Isabel, to plunge Eldoria back into chaos. Gareth and Isabel were aware of Lady Annalise's plotting, but they were determined not to let her destroy the peace they had worked so hard to achieve. They decided to confront her, to put an end to her machinations once and for all. They rode north, accompanied by a small escort of loyal knights, to meet with Lady Annalise, to offer her a chance to surrender, to avoid further bloodshed. They met in a desolate valley, the wind whipping around them, the sky a canvas of gray clouds. Lady Annalise, surrounded by her supporters, faced them with defiance. "You have come to beg for mercy?" she sneered. "You think you can defeat me?" "We have come to offer you a choice," Gareth said. "Surrender, and you will be spared. Continue your rebellion, and you will be destroyed." Lady Annalise laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "I will never surrender," she said. "I will fight to the death." The battle was short and decisive. Gareth and Isabel, fighting side by side, led their knights to victory. Lady Annalise's supporters were routed, her rebellion crushed. Lady Annalise, captured and defeated, was brought before Gareth and Isabel. She expected to be executed, to be punished for her treachery. But Isabel, remembering her own father's fate, offered her mercy.
"We will not kill you," she said.
"We will not perpetuate the cycle of violence and hatred." Instead, Lady Annalise was banished from Eldoria, stripped of her titles and her lands, forced to live in exile, a constant reminder of the consequences of ambition and betrayal. The reckoning was complete. Love and duty had triumphed over hatred and ambition. Eldoria was at peace, united under the leadership of Gareth and Isabel, a knight and a lady, a warrior and a healer, a king and a queen in all but name. They looked at each other, the wind whipping around them, the setting sun casting a golden glow on the valley. The future was uncertain, but their love was not. Epilogue. The wedding of Sir Gareth Fitzrohan and Lady Isabel of Westvale, now known as Isabel of Eldoria, was a celebration of love, loyalty, and resilience. The entire kingdom rejoiced, their cheers echoing through the streets of the capital, their hearts filled with hope for a brighter future. King Audric, though still frail, officiated the ceremony, his voice filled with emotion as he pronounced them husband and wife. He had come to see Isabel not as a bargaining piece, but as a daughter, a leader, a savior of Eldoria. Gareth and Isabel, radiant in their wedding attire, exchanged vows that were both personal and profound, promises of enduring love and unwavering devotion. They had faced war, betrayal, sacrifice, and doubt, but their love had emerged stronger than ever, a beacon of hope for a kingdom weary of conflict. The feast that followed was a joyous occasion, filled with music, dancing, and laughter. Nobles and commoners alike celebrated together, their differences forgotten, their hearts united in their love for their new leaders. In the years that followed, Gareth and Isabel ruled Eldoria wisely and justly. They rebuilt the kingdom, strengthened its defenses, and fostered a culture of peace and prosperity. They were loved and respected by their people, their names whispered in prayers of gratitude and admiration. They had children, sons and daughters who inherited their parents' courage, their compassion, and their unwavering commitment to duty. The lineage of Eldoria was secure, its future bright. Isabel never forgot her father, Lord Elmsworth. She established a memorial in his honor, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the importance of forgiveness. She also worked to heal the divisions within the kingdom, to reconcile those who had supported Lady Annalise, to bring them back into the fold. Lady Annalise, living in exile, faded into obscurity, her dreams of power unfulfilled, her name a cautionary tale whispered in the corridors of history. Gareth and Isabel, hand in hand, often walked the castle walls, watching the sun set over the kingdom they had saved, the kingdom they had built together. They had found their happily ever after, not in a fairy tale castle, but in a real world, a world filled with challenges and triumphs, with sorrow and joy, with love and loss. Their love story, a testament to the power of the human heart, became a legend, a tale told and retold throughout the generations, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope could flourish and love could conquer all. They were the falcon and the dove, forever intertwined, their love a beacon of hope for Eldoria, a testament to the enduring power of courage, compassion, and unwavering devotion. Their reign was long, their love eternal, their legacy etched in the very stones of the kingdom they had saved, together. The end.